Hi, so this is the first in a series of maybe 3 or 4 PowerPoints that I'll actually narrate, just to make sure that when we are talking about assessment, formative, summative, that we're all on the same page. As we get further into the course, you'll notice that a lot of times I've just posted the PowerPoint because I feel that information becomes self-explanatory, and you're you know getting information from the book, and the PowerPoint becomes that piece just to help support what you're already reading. So again, this is just an overview. We're looking at chapter 1 in your text. So assessment has been defined in the literature by just numerous individuals, but the two that are selected here really talk about what I believe, you know, as an educator, we need to believe that assessment, the purpose of assessment, it is the collection, synthesis, and interpretation of information to aid the teacher in decision making. One of the biggest problems that we have is in education today is we have so much data. The state is collecting data, the school districts are collecting data, the teachers are collecting data, but nobody is changing practices based on that data. You have the high stakes tests that are reported out every year, but what is truly happening with that data once it's been reported out to the schools? Are schools using it to change instruction? Are teachers using it to change their instruction? So when we talk about assessment, especially formative assessment, the sole purpose is to help the teacher, help that person facilitating learning to make better, more informed decisions, so that it doesn't become arbitrary information, that there is a purpose for it. So the aim of assessment, according to Wiggins, is to educate and improve student performance, not merely audit it. So when I think about this quote, I think about, okay, again, the formative piece. So what do we need to do to improve our practices? And number two, when he states not merely audit it, when I think about what high stakes tests do right now, that's what I feel that is happening, that we are just auditing. We're saying, this is what they know. We're not going to do anything else with it, but this is what they know at this point. There's no, well, how do I improve practices? What is that piece that children are missing? All those essential pieces of learning that aren't being coupled with the data that's being collected. So the Council of Chief State School Officers define formative assessment as is a process used by teachers and students during instruction that provides feedback to adjust ongoing teaching and learning to improve students' achievement for intended instructional outcomes. That is a very long definition to say that formative assessment is to make sure children learn. It's not just to say what they know and what they don't know, but it's to make sure that we change our teaching practices to help students, not to keep ourselves on track, not to push, to get prepared for tests or whatever, but to make sure children are learning. So here are two different things, and I think oftentimes we equate them as being similar or the same, but there's a measurement and evaluation. So what do we mean when we're talking about assessment, and what do we mean about measurement? So when we think about measurement, everybody is put on the same playing field. So we have, in a, I don't know, fifth grade classroom, you have 25 students and they're all measured using the same criteria. So it's where do they fall? Who's first, who's second, who's third, so on and so forth. So you have, if you want to think about it as a ruler. So where in the world do these children lie within that ruler? So who is at the highest point, who's at the lowest, who's in the middle, but it's a measurement. So everybody is measured using the same criteria. So educational measurement is a process of determining a quantitative or qualitative attribute of an individual. So just to make sure that, the difference is clearly defined between quantitative and qualitative. When I think about quantitative, that is using those hard numbers. So a lot of the data that you get from the state when you look at the state testing, it's going to be the quantitative data. Qualitative data, on the other hand, is more descriptive data. So it might talk about the makeup of schools. It might talk about the curriculum, but it's it doesn't look the same as quantitative. Oftentimes people will try to put qualitative data in as quantitative, but there is a difference. So qualitative is more descriptive as far as what is going on individually. So an evaluation then, what is the difference between an evaluation and a measurement? An evaluation then looks at the measurement and says, okay, what do we know based on the measurement? What have we observed and what have we decided is going to be of importance? And then we let someone know. So this is the evaluation of the data that I've gotten. So the evaluation is the outcome of the measurement after value has been added. So, what is it that we deem to be important? And how is that then given out as information? So here, just an example. So a measurement is a performance on a test. So you think about all the tests that you've taken in your academic career. So a measurement may be, okay, here is a test that you've taken in science. The highest grade was a 96. Where do you fall in that? The lowest score was a 64. Where does your score lay within that range? So an evaluation then becomes, when you look at all that data that's been collected, what is going on? Why is this important? This performance is of significant concern because why? Can they not move on to the next level if they don't understand this piece of the information? What is missing, and what will make the child successful or unsuccessful? So when we think about the standards-based system, the state of North Carolina has adopted the Common Core. So in the state, when we talk about the Common Core, it'll be the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, but it is the national standards for the Common Core. So when North Carolina adopted that, we said as a state, as educators, that we would follow a certain protocol for bringing curriculum and content into the classroom. So certain things would be happening at a certain time. So you have that piece of information already given to you from the state of North Carolina. For reading and math, we have the Common Core standards. I'm sorry, I say we. I remember I teach mathematics typically here at the university, so I'm more familiar with the Common Core, the standards for mathematics. But then you also have for other for other areas of content, you have essential standards. So reading and math have Common Core written out. The remaining content areas have essential standards. What the state of North Carolina feels is important for what grade levels and when things should be introduced, so on and so forth. So once you've defined what your target is, what that content that you're going to be focusing on, then we think about, okay, how are you going to collect evidence to make sure that learning is occurring? What piece is going to be brought into the classroom to say, okay, this is what I'm checking to understand student learning? And then after you've just made those two very significant decisions, then you decide, okay, what experience am I going to give to my students so that they can now learn this information? The targets that I have stated as being my goal. So what lessons you're going to bring into the classroom, and how are those children going to make the connections that you hope that they will make. So the assessment process. What evidence will be gathered and used to ensure students have learned? So again, you've set your goals, you've gathered your evidence. Okay, now what are you going to do with all that evidence you've collected? You're going to interpret your evidence, and then you're going to make decisions based on that. Unfortunately, in education, what happens oftentimes is that we have goals, we gather the evidence, and we begin to fall short when we start to interpret evidence and using the results to make decisions. Just as I was stating earlier with the high stakes test, what do teachers do with that information once they've gotten it back from the state? Are they changing their educational practices or their instructional practices? Are they creating new lessons that are more student centered? What are they doing with it? And oftentimes, just with the nature of teaching, we gather all this evidence. We may interpret the evidence as far as on a student by student basis, but then we sometimes fail to change teaching practices. My dissertation was written on a teacher's sense of responsibility, and I remember interviewing teachers, and they would say, well, I've given the students the information they should just learn. And, well, fine, but what if that child is not ready to learn at that moment? And then, so we need to continue to give them support. And that's where that interpreting evidence, what do we need to do to help support the learning? You can't just assume that a child is going to learn because you've given that experience to them. Just as adults, as I'm sure that you've experienced throughout your career in education, friends or classmates have learned things before you have or after you have, but not everybody is learning at this very same moment. So what do we need to do, and how do we need to support learning? So when we think about assessment as feedback and what the teacher is doing with that feedback or with the collected information, so you teach, you have your lesson that you've spent a lot of time developing, and then you assess the students. Okay, did they learn what you wanted them to learn? Could you have taken it, extended it? Could you made it deeper? Do you need to lengthen the lesson? Whatever it is. So you've assessed it, make your adjustments, and then you reteach and you reassess. So it doesn't become one shot at learning this information. Teach, assess, you adjust what you've taught the students, teach that again, and then you reassess. So when we think about, as I was talking about earlier with the Common Core, the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, you have these goals that you have to meet. So then you, as an educator, have to decide how you're going to collect evidence to match those learning goals. Sometimes there's a very large disconnect between, we have a goal, but the types of assessments we're giving don't match our learning goals. So, a huge goal in assessment is to make sure it matches what you've picked as your learning goal. So when we're talking about assessment, unfortunately, for many, many years, education has made it a snapshot. Again, I keep going back to the high stakes test, but again, that's a snapshot of what is happening in that classroom for that student for an entire academic year. So when we are trying to improve instruction, improve students' understanding, we need to think about over time. So it's many little pieces that come together and depict what that student understands and what they have learned over time. So think of it more as a photo album instead of that one-time shot. So when we're collecting those pieces of information, that evidence for assessment, we need to make sure that we're collecting things that are authentic, that match our goals. That if we're creating an assessment, a test, a formal assessment like that, that the questions and the way we've questioned them and what types of information we've brought in mirrors what has been taught in the classroom. So, you don't give a test that is, tests aren't meant to trick kids, or shouldn't be, but they're also meant to see how deeply the students understand. So just make sure that they align with the goals of your content. So you have your quizzes, informal checks for understanding. This is walking around, asking students questions on a daily basis. And the one thing that is often skipped is student self-assessment. How do the students see themselves in their learning? What piece do they still feel that they need help on? So, I think that we need to do a better job of making sure that we are asking the right questions, not just assuming. So, what is your role? Well, you as a facilitator of learning need to make sure you're gathering the accurate information about student achievement, not just collecting information, but accurate. You know, anybody can collect information. You can write test scores down, you can do lots of very easy things, but it's about the accurate information. What does that student, what does that child know, and what do they not know? Again, and use the assessment process and its results to effectively improve achievement, to make changes in what you're doing to make sure children are moving ahead. So for your assignment, you need to read an article from Guskey, 2010, on Mastery Learning. He defines what he believes mastery learning is, but if you look at the first small, right here, this comes from Bloom and Bloom's taxonomy. I think you're probably most familiar with, but all students can reach high levels of achievement if given time and appropriate learning conditions. That statement doesn't say all children learn at the same time in the same space. So mastery learning happens, but there is a process. So Guskey has defined his idea of mastery learning, but it also mirrors what Bloom said, 40 years ago almost. Yeah, over 40 years. So anyhow, please read the article. As you read, just make sure you take notes on new ideas or terms, take notes about the teacher's role in mastery learning, and then look at all these different steps for interventions and what teachers have done to promote mastery learning. So pre-assessments, we hear about those all the time. So you have high quality group-based initial instruction, maybe what we're thinking more of direct instruction, the progress, that formative assessment, high quality corrective instruction. So this is where we've adjusted and we've retaught and we're going back and we're going to, let the children have another experience if they haven't mastered the learning, and then another formative assessment, and then we move on, and then we go to some of the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, some of those higher level learning ideas. So please, again, make sure you read Guskey's article. It should be linked right through As You Learn, and then make sure you're taking notes on things that are unfamiliar to you. All right, so this concludes our first narrated PowerPoint. I think I have about, 4 more, so we'll see how this goes. Again, this is extremely hard for me to sit in a room with a headset on and talk to no one. I would much rather have you in front of me, but, sometimes we have to make do. So anyhow, if you have any questions, please make sure you contact me. If not, I will probably talk to you tomorrow, I think, on the next PowerPoint. So have a great day. Bye.